local to Italy, namely ancient Rome.
Italy's real monopoly on artistic rebirth began in the 16th century with the first modern historians of art, most of whom, as it happened, were Italian. Filled with local pride, they obscured the nature of the great century of change. For 100 years earlier, in the 15th century, even Italians looked northward to the art of Jan van Eyck for examples of supreme artistic achievement.
Jan van Eyck made paintings that for the first time resembled almost perfectly the real world. So much so that he transformed the craft of painting into the...
Sorry about that.
His work launched an artistic renaissance in Northern Europe that rivals the achievements of his Italian contemporaries and that remains uncannily relevant to us today. I'll be telling the story of this other renaissance, this northern one. It's an astonishing movement that founded some of our most deeply held beliefs about art and about artists. It begins with a new way of painting, but it soon expands to become a true image revolution.
At around 1500, a young German painter harnessed a new technology that transformed everything. The printing press made images available to a vastly expanded audience, and this painter used it to become the first world-famous artist. Soon the image revolution of the North became a revolt against images. Instead of making images, people passionately broke them. And in the wake of that destruction, modern art was born.
Taken together, these breakthroughs created a northern renaissance that changed art forever.
In the year 1420, Europe was a continent in the shadow of an unprecedented catastrophe. Just 60 years earlier, plague had wiped out more than a third of the entire population. The church stood divided, with rival popes in Rome and Avignon. Meanwhile, the old political powers of the North, England and France, were locked in a conflict that would last 100 years. But one area above all others was flourishing: Flanders, in present-day Belgium and Holland. And from there, a profound artistic revolution spread out across the continent. St. Bavo's Cathedral in Ghent still holds the painting, a great altarpiece, that started that revolution.
The Ghent altarpiece has overwhelmed viewers since it stood complete in 1432. People of the time pronounced it the most beautiful work in Christendom, and its chief creator, Jan van Eyck, was deemed the prince of painters. Today it remains arguably the finest single painting in the world, and of all its many wonders, the one most singled out for praise is the figure of Adam.
To early observers, this painted Adam looked like a living being. Paint captures the minute subtleties of flesh. Blood seems to pulse beneath flesh, and the skin of Adam's hands and face is visibly tanned by the sun. One detail intensifies this semblance of animation. Adam raises his big toe so that you can see its underside. The toe seems even to stick out of the stone niche where the figure stands, allowing Adam to appear to step into our world. Remember, this is Adam who sinned, who therefore died, and who, as the ongoing consequence of his sin, made us all mortal. In the painting, Adam lives again. Resurrected, he strides towards the paradise he lost.
For the first time in the history of art, the dead were seen to live again. And with this rebirth, a new historical epoch began. Here in Northern Europe, this period had a different shape and different heroes than the more famous Renaissance in Italy. Yet in a sense, the Northern Renaissance is the more stunning rebirth, and the man who launched it here in Ghent was, according to the people of the time, the greatest painter who ever lived.
And through astonishing paintings like this, Jan van Eyck reinvented what his craft at its highest level could do. More than any single artist, he made painting into the ultimate art. During the preceding century, all across Europe, the supreme arts, both in price and in status, were luxury objects made of a mixture of expensive materials. Today, these are generally consigned to museums of decorative or applied art. The market for these objects was international, centered on the courts of royalty and nobility. And because these artists themselves circulated through these courts, all works, no matter what their medium or purpose, have the same recognizable look and the same elegant style.
Style advertised a person's belonging to a certain lifestyle. It exhibited the magnificence that distinguished nobles from ordinary people. Things in the courtly style aimed to look expensive. Ideally, they consisted of the most expensive materials worked in the most time-consuming ways. This explains the dominance of tapestries as an art form.
The finest tapestries would be woven of silk thread, individually entwined in silver and gold. They told stories commemorating famous victories or religious scenes. But by the beginning of the 15th century, the hunger for such ostentatiously luxurious objects, such as tapestry, began to be replaced by a taste for something new. And this change took root in the most lavish culture in Europe of the time, the court of the Duke of Burgundy. To recover that now forgotten world, we need to travel south from Flanders. The dynasty of the Dukes of Burgundy had its traditional seat in the wine-growing regions southeast of Paris. But through marriage, diplomacy, and war, their territories eventually stretched all the way back to Flanders. In this culture, magnificence publicized power. Indeed, the dukes sincerely believed that their own lavish spending trickled down to benefit the entire population of Burgundy. According to economic theorists of the day, courtly expenditure was like the wind that drives the windmills, like the rain that fertilizes the fields. The works the dukes commissioned included hundreds of huge, precious tapestries, enough to cover their many residences inside and out. Useless but staggeringly costly objects made of gold, gems, pearls, and opaque enamel were displayed briefly, only to be melted down to make new confections. Indeed, like the fabulous foods served at Burgundian court festivities, such works took long to prepare but were swiftly consumed. The first Duke of an expanded Burgundy assembled a dazzling team of artists, including one momentous innovator, the Netherlandish sculptor Klaus Schluter. And it's in his work, in the medium of carved stone, that a new realism first appears. Before Schluter, in the great cathedrals of Western Europe, monumental sculpture remained subordinate to architecture. Inert figures stood contained by the structures they embellished. Schluter changed all this.
Imagine you lived in the year 1400 and you were asked to predict which art would reign supreme over the next 600 years. I think if you came to the Well of Moses here in Dijon, you would place your bet on sculpture. The sculptor of this well, Schluter, has been able to do things with stone which no one previously had been able to do. He is able to give each of these figures of Old Testament prophets a gravity and a presence which makes them look like living beings. It's not simply the way he represents them in the round as figures capable of movement, but it's also the way he individualizes each of the figures. The way the shoes are built, the way the clothing hangs, such that each of the figures seems both alive and completely individualized.
While painting was an important art in this period, it was not yet the art of arts. Indeed, it was often little more than an embellishment to sculpture. Altarpieces of the period show clearly that sculpture was the dominant craft. Paintings occur in these ensembles on the shutters, on the outer part, the everyday side. They tell stories and prepare the way for the glorious spectacle that will occur when they open up.
And that spectacle, that climax, both ritually as well as aesthetically of the altarpiece, occurs in the medium of sculpture, not painting.
The painting on the wings of this altarpiece in Dijon was created by the artist Melchior Bruderlam just 12 years before the Ghent altarpiece. It's typical of painting of the time. And while the stories it tells are clear, the figures in them, and especially the spaces between them, look awkward to the modern eye. Courtly patrons did value highly one form of painting, however, books of hours. The illuminators of these private prayer books were the cutting-edge painters of their day.
Working within the miniature confines of the prayer book, illuminators of the period were masters of spatial manipulation. For them, an inch of vellum was enough to invoke an entire world.
And in the decades around 1400, manuscript...
Do you guys see this app right here? It's called Audible. There's actually a better way to make money on Amazon other than selling physical.
Sorry about that. I have no idea it keeps coming out.
Through spectacular artistic achievements. First, pictorial space is confined to a sort of box, like a doll's house, that looks as if it projects outward from the surface of the page. Then, in the second half of the 14th century, a new standard is set. sealed off from the rest of the page by a frame, the illuminated image reads like a view through an opening or window into a coherent world. Once opened, that world could be infinitely expanded, encompassing whole landscapes in which sacred scenes as well as the activities of everyday life get played out.
Now, instead of a flat surface covered by writing and ornament, there could be windows everywhere, each one opening to a burst of three-dimensional space.
These experiments served a particular aim, namely to enhance the viewer's experience of sacred persons and stories. So illuminators fostered an intimate dialogue between image and beholder that achieves what we expect of great art today. At the climax of this tradition, there emerged a master who could do everything. From infinite landscapes to perfectly realized interiors. In paintings by this exceptional master, the painted image escapes the bounds of the illuminated book. Art historians have attributed these wildly innovative miniatures to the young Jan van Eyck. Jan van Eyck's self-portrait, painted in 1433, brings the painter alive in a way that written historical documents of the time cannot. Only fragments of his life story have survived, but those fragments are more than we know about any other northern painter of the time.
In this period, painters didn't enjoy a special status among craftsmen. In fact, they were ranked rather low, on par with tanners and undertakers, maybe because they got their hands dirty, but maybe because they made graven images, something frowned on by the Bible. What is surprising is how much we do know about Van Eyck, and we know about him mainly because of the quality of his work. Sheer artistry caused people to save and to gather facts about the artist. Van Eyck's milieu helped too. The Burgundian court cultivated new ideas about personal skill and about fame. Finally, Van Eyck's artworks themselves speak about the artist. Unlike the anonymous paintings which preceded them, his pictures include signatures, dates, personal mottos, even self-portraits. To a degree never seen before, Van Eyck's works celebrate the person who made them.
All right, so let's stop the video right here. This video is already posted in the page of here, week 12-1 Renaissance. So please continue to watch it now. How's Jan van Eyck? He's also amazing Renaissance artist, right? They're slightly different with the, these three masters from the Italy. A little bit more biblical, right? So, in the last meeting, we learned three Renaissance masters, right? Give me 1 second. I'm sorry. So we learned Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and the last semester, Raphael. So compared these three masters, the Jan van Eyck's works are a little more dark and a little bit more serious, and it's very biblical. So we have a discussion about the Renaissance art one more time. So we learned the three masters from the High Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. Please compare these three masters' work styles and write which artist work preference. That's today's discussion. And we're gonna move on to the next chapter, 17th and 18th centuries. So we're gonna see the beginning part of this chapter because the beginning part is pretty much related to the Renaissance art. All right, so let's see the 17th and 18th centuries art in Europe. After the Renaissance, there were two major art movements. One is Baroque and the other one is the Rococo. So let's see the background and the history about the 17th and 18th centuries art. And we're gonna deeply check the Baroque and the Rococo art in the next meeting. So the period of 17th and 18th centuries in Europe is called the Age of Kings. Some of the most powerful rulers in history occupied the thrones of various countries during this time. The same period could equally be called the Age of Colonial Settlement. The Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the English, and the French had established permanent settlements in North and South America. So Baroque art was an art movement during turbulent 17th and 18th century. And Baroque art differs from that of the Renaissance. So that is the key point of this chapter. Baroque art differs from that of the Renaissance. So Baroque art is full of emotion, energy, and movement. So we'll see how Baroque art is different with the Renaissance. The colors are more vivid in Baroque art than in Renaissance art, with greater contrast between colors and between light and dark. Baroque art had been called dynamic, sometimes even theatrical. In architecture and sculpture, where the Renaissance sought a classic simplicity, the Baroque favored ornamentation as rich and complex as possible. So let's compare the Renaissance and the Baroque art styles. So everyone look at these pictures of the church's sculptures, the church's interiors. The left one is the Renaissance style, and the right one is the Baroque style. Can you find the difference between these two styles? What's the difference?
The Baroque style look a little lighter.
The right one?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. How about the decoration, of the interior?
The
More
Baroque
details.
seems more ornate. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the Renaissance architecture style shows a simple, logical, and classical. On the other hand, Baroque architecture shows ornamentational and sophisticated. Very good. Now let's look at these two sculptures to compare the Renaissance and the Baroque art. The left one is Michelangelo's David statue in the Renaissance era. And the right one is Gianlorenzo Bernini's Saint Teresa in Baroque era. So of course, these two sculptures are amazingly beautiful and reach the highest technique in fine art. We can say it. However, the first feeling for these two sculptures are totally different. Can you find the difference between these two sculptures?
The Baroque art, because of the clothing, it seemed to have like there's movement and flow, and the Baroque art.
Exactly, Selena, very good. Yes. So, the David statue, on the left of the Michelangelo's David statue, shows the beauty of balance, and it shows the ideal beauty, and it is very bright to celebrate the hero. On the other hand, like Selena said, the Saint Teresa is dramatic, even theatrical, and it shows heavy light contrast by locating the sculpture in the darkest spot and using window light from the top of the roof. And so that is one of the features of the Baroque art style. Now let's compare these two paintings. The left one is Raphael's painting, The School of Athens, the Renaissance, and the right one is the Peter Paul Rubens, The Rising of the Cross of the Baroque style. What's the difference?
The subject matter for Baroque is more angular,
Very,
whereas opposed to the Renaissance.
that's right.
Yeah.
Very good point. So as you can see, the Renaissance art, Raphael's painting looks very calm and using the horizontal line, right? Looks very calm. On the other hand, the Rising of the Cross painting shows lots of diagonal line, right? Looks very, dynamical and, showing the very strong movement here. Very good. So again, the Renaissance painting shows calm, peaceful, bright, and logical. Also, it's using the 1-point linear perspective with the vanishing point on the center, which means looks very balanced. On the other hand, Rubens' painting is focused on the subject here, Jesus Christ. So it's not really following the perspective rule, and it shows deep contrast with bright highlight and very dark shadow. Also, the movement is dramatic and dynamic. So the whole painting mood is very emotional. So, to conclusion, the Renaissance art shows stillness, logicality, peace and calm, classicism, and brightness. And the Baroque art shows motion, emotion, turbulence, grandeur, and contrast. So please remember each art movement featured, and then please know the understand the comparison of these two art movements. And we're gonna continue to see this chapter in the next meeting to see the Baroque art in detail and the next art movement, Rococo. And again, we have a discussion today related to the Renaissance chapter. So we learned the high Renaissance artists Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. Please compare these three masters' work styles and write which artist work preference and why. And also, by tonight, you have to post the assignment to the virtual museum tour. And please check your participation grade. And if you missed anything, please post it as soon as possible and let me know to upgrade your grade. All right. So that's it for today.